You step into a hall where the air is heavy with incense, roasting meat, and whispers. Candles drip like slow blood over gold trays, and the marble beneath your feet hums with secrets centuries old. Every breath tastes of sin sweetened by honeyed wine. You are in the Vatican, Rome, 1502, and every eye in this room hides a dagger behind a smile. Before we begin tonight's story of betrayal and rebirth, take a moment to look around this banquet of shadows. You, yes, you, are part of a vast circle of minds from every corner of the world who love peeling back the gilded masks of history. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because tonight, from Lahore to Lisbon, from Sydney to São Paulo, we all dine together under the same candlelight. And if stories like this fascinate you, where power and desire share the same breath, then raise your glass and subscribe, because what's coming next is both magnificent and monstrous. The year is 1502. Rome glows like an ember at the center of a continent obsessed with control. Italy is no country. It's a chessboard of city-states, each ruled by families who believe God himself favors their bloodline. Venice has its merchants, Milan its mercenaries, Florence its thinkers, but Rome has the Borgias. At the head of this family stands Pope Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia, a man whose papal robes could barely hide the stains of ambition. His Rome was a kingdom of contradiction, holy on its altars, unholy in its corridors. The Pope's enemies called his reign the Golden Age of Sin. His allies called it survival. And at the center of his dynasty stands his daughter, Lucrezia Borgia. 22 years old, golden-haired, famously beautiful, and dangerously useful. To the world, she is the Madonna of power, soft, smiling, and silent. To her family, she is a bridge, a diplomatic instrument in silk gloves. This is not her first marriage, not even her second. Her name carries the ghosts of annulments and assassinations. Her first husband was declared impotent, a lie whispered loudly enough to ruin him. Her second was murdered, strangled on Vatican steps. Both men fell, but Lucrezia endured. Now she is to be wed again, this time to Alfonso d'Este, heir to the Duchy of Ferrara. The Este family is old, proud, and wary. To them, the Borgias are upstarts with the stench of corruption. They demand proof of purity, of legitimacy, of safety. But for now, there is wine to pour, and a stage to set. The Vatican banquet glitters like a fever dream. Silk banners bearing the Borgia bull flutter beside the Est eagle. The scent of roasted peacock fills the air, its feathers painted with powdered gold. Courtiers murmur beneath their jeweled masks, pretending not to glance at Lucrezia as she enters the hall. Her gown is the color of pale fire, her veil sheer enough to seem deliberate. The music falters for a heartbeat, then resumes. From his throne-like seat, Pope Alexander raises a goblet. "To family," he declares, voice booming against the vaulted ceiling. "To peace." But beneath his blessing, his eyes flicker toward his son, Cesare, the Pope's iron-fisted enforcer, the man who kills so his father may smile. Cesare nods once and the room exhales. Lucrezia smiles too, practiced and polite, but her gaze lingers on no one. She knows the weight of the whispers. Some call her the serpent's daughter, others the serpent itself. Yet none of them see the truth, that behind the gentle eyes is a woman cataloging every move, every word, every mask. A cardinal leans to another and murmurs, "A lovely bride. A shame she's been passed around more than the Eucharist." The other smirks, hiding his mouth behind a chalice. Lucrezia hears. She doesn't flinch. Instead, she adjusts her ring, the gesture of a woman who has learned to weaponize composure. As the night deepens, the laughter grows louder. Dancers whirl. Poets perform verses comparing Lucrezia to Venus, to Saint Cecilia, to Rome itself. Every compliment feels like a cage, gilded and locked. Alfonso d'Este, her groom, sits stiff beside her, a young man already old with suspicion. He laughs at nothing. Outside, the bells of St. Peter's toll midnight. The revelry swells, yet the hall feels colder. Servants refill goblets with red wine so dark it might be blood. The Pope whispers to Cesare, Cesare to an ambassador, and within moments a rumor begins its quiet crawl across the room. The marriage must not merely be celebrated, it must be witnessed. Not the feast, the act, the consummation. The notion drifts through the hall like smoke, half joke, half threat. But in Ferrara, such demands are not uncommon. The Este family fears scandal. They demand proof of potency, of fertility, of alliance made real. And so, behind the laughter, behind the clinking silverware, plans are already unfolding for what must come after this feast. Lucrezia lifts her goblet again. Her hand doesn't tremble. To anyone watching, she seems serene. But behind her eyes flickers a different fire, a thought too dangerous to name. She has played this role before. She knows the script. Yet this time, she intends to rewrite it. The banquet stretches past midnight. Candles burn low, perfumed smoke curls in ghostly shapes, and the musicians' notes turn slow and hypnotic. Somewhere in the Vatican corridors, servants are preparing a chamber, a bed, witnesses, documents. For now, the Pope raises his hand once more. Tonight, he proclaims, we seal not merely a marriage, but the fate of Italy itself. The crowd cheers, drunk on spectacle. Lucrezia smiles as expected, but as her gaze meets the candlelit reflection of herself in the goblet's surface, the smile falters for a fraction of a second. Somewhere deep inside, she knows. This night will not end in laughter. It will end in silence, in curtains drawn, in the eyes of strangers watching the unwatchable. And when it does, when the feasting turns to ritual and the bride becomes the proof, history will remember it by a single phrase whispered in scandal and awe, 3 times that night, while they all watched. The banquet had ended hours ago, but the echo of its laughter still clung to the stone walls like a curse. The Vatican slept uneasily that night, its corridors humming with rumors that would soon become history. In the dim candlelight of a hastily prepared chamber, the air was heavy, not with perfume now, but with the raw, unvarnished tension of ritual. Outside, the revelers had stumbled home. Inside, a different kind of performance was about to begin. The curtains were drawn halfway across the chamber, thick crimson velvet that muffled sound and suffocated light. Through the narrow parting, a cluster of men waited, ambassadors from Ferrara, papal clerics and notaries, their quills poised like vultures' beaks. Each had been chosen not for faith, but for their ability to witness. They were to ensure that no doubt could later be sown about the consummation of this union, no whisper of impotence, no claim of fraud. This was the logic of dynasties. A marriage unconsummated was a marriage unsealed. Love was irrelevant. The act itself was currency. Flesh as parchment, blood as ink. Lucrezia Borgia stood before them, motionless beneath her veil. The silk clung to her shoulders as if reluctant to let go. Her husband, Alfonso d'Este, looked away, his face pale, his jaw locked. He too knew what was demanded of them. The Este family's envoys had insisted on this grotesque guarantee. If their heir was to bind himself to a Borgia, the evidence would be made irrefutable. The Pope's attendants whispered final instructions. A notary coughed softly. One of the witnesses, the Ferrarese secretary Ercole Strozzi, would later record that the silence of that room was thicker than any prayer. Lucrezia spoke first, her voice low but steady. So this is how alliances are blessed now? Not with vows, but with eyes. No one answered. They were not there to speak. They were there to observe. The candles flickered. The scent of beeswax mingled with sweat and fear. Someone, a cleric perhaps, murmured, "The law must be satisfied." And so, history watched. It is easy to forget, centuries later, that this was not unique to the Borgias. Across Europe, noble marriages often required such proofs, though rarely were they performed under the gaze of so many. In this case, the paranoia of politics had reached its purest form: control through humiliation. The Borgias were infamous, and the Este family intended to ensure their heir would not become another casualty of papal games. The ritual unfolded in silence. The witnesses recorded what they saw, their faces masks of professionalism but their eyes restless. For them, this was duty. For Lucrezia, it was dissection. Every gesture was reduced to testimony. Her humanity stripped, she became a document signed in candlelight. When it was over, the curtains were drawn again. The witnesses withdrew one by one, each carrying a secret no one would ever confess aloud. Outside, the corridors were still. Only the faint rustle of robes and the scratch of quills broke the silence. The notaries wrote swiftly, recording what must never be spoken, yet could never be denied. But the night was not done. The next evening, word spread through Ferrara that the Este envoys demanded repetition, to dispel all shadow of doubt. Twice more the act was observed, twice more recorded, and thus the phrase took root. 3 times that night. By morning, the story had traveled faster than the messengers themselves. From Rome to Venice, from Florence to Paris, whispers carried her name like a fever. Some claimed the Pope himself had stood among the witnesses, an exaggeration, but one that suited the scandal. Others swore Cesare Borgia laughed as he drank to his sister's proof. Whatever the truth, the damage was done. The humiliation that was meant to secure her place instead branded her infamy. Yet, in its cruelty, something shifted. When the witnesses left that chamber, they thought they had seen submission. They had seen survival. For Lucrezia, this night was not an end, but a beginning, a rebirth through degradation. In the eyes of her enemies, she had been reduced to nothing more than a vessel. In her own, she had learned the one lesson that would define her reign, that exposure breeds immunity. Once you have been seen at your lowest, no gaze can harm you again. She emerged from that chamber silent, serene, untouchable. The servants who met her eyes described her as pale as the host and twice as calm. She spoke little, smiled less. But within days, her composure became legend. The Este court, expecting a fragile bride, received a duchess forged in fire. Alfonso d'Este, who had entered the marriage with suspicion, soon found his wife far more formidable than her reputation allowed. She ran his household with quiet precision, soothed his allies, and charmed his enemies. Yet the shadow of that night never left her. It hovered over her every gesture, every glance, an invisible crown of thorns reminding her what she had endured. In time, letters written by ambassadors to Ferrara would recall that she seemed haunted by calm, a woman who moved through rooms like a ghost that refused to fade. Even Cesare, hardened by war, once remarked, "My sister has learned to use silence as I use steel." The Vatican's courtiers forgot the details, but not the legend. They spoke of that night in lowered voices, each retelling more elaborate than the last. Some turned it into scandal, others into allegory. Yet beneath every exaggeration lay a single truth. On that night, Lucrezia Borgia stopped being a pawn. The witnesses thought they were recording her submission. In truth, they were documenting her first victory. Years later, when she ruled Ferrara with grace and cunning, those same men would look back and realize what they had seen was not weakness, but coronation. A woman, stripped of privacy, clothed in humiliation, had begun to build her power upon the very shame they forced upon her. And though the witnesses behind the curtain faded into dust, their quills long broken, the legend they helped create endured. It whispered through palaces, across generations, through every tale of beauty and ruin that bore her name. Because history, like that candlelit room, always watches. And what it sees is never forgotten. The sound of the bells in Ferrara is not the toll of mourning, but of mastery. They echo across the marble courtyards and over the silver-threaded Po River, announcing not a wedding, not a death, but a reign. The city that once whispered her name in scandal now utters it in reverence. Duchessa Lucrezia. Her footsteps, once followed by rumor, now guide the rhythm of a court that lives and dies by her approval. Time, that cruel chronicler, has bowed its head. The Duchess sits before her mirror, not as a woman admiring herself, but as a strategist reading her reflection as if it were scripture. The glass offers her not beauty, but memory. The eyes staring back are those of a woman who has seen her reputation burnt and rebuilt, her body used as diplomacy, her silence mistaken for compliance. The candlelight glints across a strand of pearls at her throat. White, pure, deliberate. Symbols, all of them. Every piece she wears, every smile she gives is a calculated move on a board she now owns. Ferrara, once a provincial court overshadowed by Rome's venom, hums like a hive of intellect and artistry. Poets recite verses beneath frescoed ceilings. Musicians tune lutes whose strings hum in the evening heat. Lucrezia's salons are the empire's most coveted invitation, arenas of wit and loyalty disguised as entertainment. She listens as men debate theology and women whisper philosophy, her expression serene, her thoughts unreadable. In this court, she once murmured to her confessor, truth is not what's spoken, it's what is remembered. The Duchess has learned that control lies not in power displayed, but in perception managed. She writes letters, dozens each dawn, her script precise as lace, dispatching them to ambassadors, cardinals, and old enemies. Each word is weighted, each seal a blade hidden in silk. Even her acts of piety are performances of statecraft. When she kneels in the ducal chapel, it is not repentance that glows on her face, but command. She knows the watching eyes mistake devotion for docility, and she allows them their illusion. Outside her window, Ferrara blossoms under her reign. Painters immortalize her in fresco and portrait. Faces softened, eyes saintly, halos of gold leaf crowning her image. The duchy becomes a sanctuary of art and order, yet beneath the elegance runs an invisible current of control. Servants who gossip find themselves reassigned to the borderlands. Courtiers who flatter too loudly are quietly dismissed. Her vengeance is never loud. It is elegant, measured, and inescapable. Visitors to Ferrara often leave unsettled, unable to reconcile the woman before them with the monstrous myths that once surrounded her. She smiles, wrote one Venetian envoy, as if she remembers something you do not. Indeed, she remembers everything. The candlelit humiliation, the stifling scent of roses in her wedding chamber, the eyes that watched. She remembers the laughter, the pity, the chroniclers who painted her as pawn and harlot. And she remembers how silence can be a blade sharper than confession. When her husband, Duke Alfonso, once confronted her about an intercepted letter, a correspondence not scandalous but strategic, she met his gaze and said, "My lord, there are letters you read and letters you are meant to find." His anger dissolved into confusion, then respect. She had mastered the art of speaking truths that sound like riddles. In the evenings, when the palace quiets and even the fountains seem to whisper in reverence, she walks the corridors lined with portraits of her ancestors. Each face looks down, men of power, women of intrigue, and she smiles. They had ruled through blood and fear. She rules through memory. The same hands that once trembled now sign decrees, commission chapels, and extend patronage that binds every artist and courtier to her legacy. The transformation is complete. The girl who once served as spectacle now directs the gaze of Europe. Every ambassador who bows before her remembers the rumors but dares not repeat them. Her past, once used to chain her, has become a crown, invisible yet unshakable. One night, after a grand feast where laughter filled the vaulted halls, Lucrezia lingers in her private chambers. A storm gathers outside, the wind pressing against the windows, the candles swaying. She opens a drawer and takes out an old letter, brittle and faded, written in her father's hand. My daughter is to be both weapon and warning. She traces the ink with her finger, the faint smile returning. Then I have done both, she whispers. The storm's rumble answers her, a low, approving growl from the heavens. The camera pulls back, through the rain-streaked glass, over the flickering candles, out into the city whose lights burn like constellations below. Ferrara sleeps beneath her gaze, unaware that the woman who governs them has turned memory itself into her empire. In the silence that follows, the bells toll once more. Not for prayer nor for penance, but for a victory history will never fully understand. And somewhere, in the echo between chime and rain, the Duchess remembers everything.